You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
This is Neil Frederick Foden. Born in August of 1957, he was in his 60s when these events took place. Neil Foden had spent over 3 decades in the Welsh education system. His career started in 1988 as an English teacher, and he rapidly climbed the ladder. By 1997, he had become the principal of one of the largest high schools in North Wales. He was a well-known figure in the regional education community. Foden was known for his strong opinions and frequent media appearances, both locally and nationally. He was often called upon to comment on school policies and funding issues, and his perspective was trusted by politicians and journalists alike. In time, this public profile grew into an influence that mirrored his grandiose personality. His colleagues described him as a man who dominated meetings, seizing control of decisions typically shared among senior administrators and the school board. He even engineered systems designed to consolidate power entirely in his hands, using short-term employment contracts and public criticism to maintain his grip. He ruled his staff through fear. Employees would later tell investigators they were afraid that speaking up about anything could cost them their jobs. And it wasn't just the staff. Parents feared their children could be expelled from the school. On one occasion, an employment tribunal found him guilty of bullying a teacher. As a result, he received a formal reprimand that would remain on his record for 2 years. But as it turned out, this 2-year reprimand had little practical effect. He was still allowed to teach and run the school. The bullying accusation against Neil stemmed from something more. He had been falsifying exam results to boost the school's reputation, and another teacher had noticed. This teacher spoke up and reported Foden. The whistleblower later testified that after he raised the issue of the falsified exam results, Foden subjected him to 4 years of harassment. During the investigation, Foden managed to rally the support of nearly his entire staff, who all signed a letter in his defense. Some might argue they signed it under duress, fearing they would become his next target. But as it turned out, he also had a circle of loyalists working for him, and this complete lack of opposition paved the way for some truly horrendous crimes. Then, in 2018, the school's vice principal and head of student safety passed away. Seizing the opportunity, Foden appointed himself to oversee all pastoral care and child protection duties. He possessed no qualifications or experience in student protection, but no one dared to challenge him. This move placed Foden in a position of absolute power, giving him direct access to the school's most vulnerable students. Anytime a student in crisis needed support, it became an opportunity for him to take advantage. You can likely see where this is headed. Soon after, Foden made national headlines across the UK when he callously ordered that students with an unpaid lunch debt of just 2 pence were to be denied their school lunch. The policy caused a massive public outcry in the UK and drew sharp criticism from English soccer star Marcus Rashford. However, this incident would pale in comparison to what he was doing both in plain sight and behind closed doors. Now, before we go any further, it's important to note that a formal review of this case highlighted numerous warning signs that had emerged as early as 2018. In total, the report identified 50 missed opportunities to stop this man's predatory behavior. In 2018, staff members saw him messaging a student late at night from his personal social media account. That same student was later seen asleep in his office, her head resting on his desk. Around that same time, another student reported seeing him walking alone with a female student on school property, right before she got into his car. The police were notified, but he simply explained it away, claiming he was just giving the girl a ride home. Neither student was ever interviewed, and the case was quickly closed. As mentioned before, the school's student safety coordinator had passed away, and Foden appointed himself to the role. From that moment on, every single concern raised about him was funneled directly back to him. This created a glaring conflict of interest that should have been caught immediately. He began meeting with students one-on-one in his office and other private locations, for what he called support sessions. Colleagues would later tell investigators that during these meetings, he kept the lights off and the blinds drawn, claiming it was necessary to protect the students' confidentiality. In 2019, senior staff witnessed him escorting a student to police interviews and to medical appointments without any parental consent. They warned him about maintaining professional boundaries, but a formal record of the incident was never created. In 2020, outside agencies, including the NSPCC and the SA Referral Center, made referrals concerning his behavior. Each one was dismissed for not meeting the threshold required for a child protection investigation. During the national lockdown that same year, he kept 2 students at the school without authorization. Senior colleagues discussed their growing unease, but they later admitted they were simply too afraid to report him. In 2021, while these concerns remained unresolved, he was promoted to an executive position at another school. The complaints followed him to the new school, including reports of improper physical restraint and unprofessional contact with a female student. By early 2022, both staff and students were openly commenting on how he was frequently left alone with vulnerable female students. Then, in March of 2023, his administrative team issued a written warning, instructing him to meet with students only with the door open and the blinds raised. Instructions he completely ignored. In the summer of 2023, a social worker raised a red flag after he hugged a student without her consent. That report was shuffled between different authorities for nearly 9 weeks, with no action taken. All the while, he continued to hold private meetings with students. There were countless other instances where the slightest intervention, or if the school boards had just scratched beneath the surface, they would have uncovered a full-blown scandal. But finally, on September 6, 2023, a student disclosed to the staff that she had been involved in a relationship with Neil, showing them messages and photos from her phone. This time, staff members, administrators, and most importantly, the police, could not simply sweep this under the rug. It all began with a child referred to as Victim A. Before we continue, there are 2 important things to note. First, the victims were identified by coded initials in all official documents, as they were under 18 years old at the time and are legally entitled to lifelong anonymity under UK law. And second, the events that follow are disturbing. Victim A enrolled in Neil's school in 2017 with previously identified vulnerabilities, and a special protection plan was put in place to ensure her safety during the school day. This plan explicitly required that all counseling support be provided exclusively by female staff members. But in January of 2019, an incident involving Victim A and a government agency required a responsible adult to be present. Instead of a parent or an approved female staff member, Neil himself escorted this victim to the meeting. For a principal overseeing a school of roughly 1,400 students, this was highly unusual and, more importantly, a direct violation of her agreed-upon safety plan. As part of that same event, Neil gave Victim A his personal email address, allowing him to communicate with her directly. He then let the contact continue well beyond the scope of the immediate issue, at times failing to respond for long periods, a tactic which only increased her dependence on his attention. This is a classic grooming technique. Neil later took Victim A to a doctor's appointment, and then to an SA referral center. He started meeting with her one-on-one, under the guise of providing pastoral care. Later, he even took her to a gynecologist appointment. Every single one of these interactions took place without the knowledge or consent of Victim A's parents. Medical correspondence began to be addressed directly to him, as if he were the student's legal guardian. His colleagues noticed his growing closeness to the vulnerable student and reported multiple boundary violations on school grounds. He would spend extended periods of time alone with her in his office. Staff members later recalled that she would rest her head on his shoulder. They were seen holding hands, and he began driving her to and from her appointments. Soon after, she had his personal cell phone number. Other teachers warned him to step back, but he refused. He started visiting victim A's home, picking her up for late-night drives. Her mother was told by Neil that they were attending cake-baking classes that ended at 9:30 in the evening. She grew suspicious. Neil and victim A reportedly joked with each other about how their interactions might appear to outsiders, and over time, the situation escalated. They started messaging each other on WhatsApp and instructed her to erase all their messages. Later, accounts and digital evidence reveal their contact intensified while they were in the car. Neil compelled victim A to perform oral sex on him. She later reported that when she asked him to stop, he forced her to keep going. Neil harbored a lifelong obsession with urine. So, while in the car, he made his victims drink gallons of water and then forced them to hold their bladders until they urinated for him. What he did with the urine was never revealed. Texts showed him ordering her to keep silent and take the secret to her grave. The victim's internet searches included phrases like, "How to tell if an older man likes you or is grooming you," as well as questions about possible prison terms for sexual assault. Victim A was somewhat aware she might be at risk, but being young and deeply involved, the abuse persisted. Further investigations found that victim A wasn't the only student affected. Another very vulnerable girl Neil was grooming was victim C. In early 2018, school records showed he routinely messaged victim C late at night on her personal email. Staff also observed that she spent time in his office, including one instance where she was seen asleep with her head resting on his desk. On July 9, 2018, a student reported seeing him walking with a girl, who then got into his car. The school identified this girl as victim C, and we now understand what typically happened to girls who entered his vehicle. The police did question Neil, but they accepted his explanation that she needed a ride home. The pupil who reported this was never interviewed, and again, no further steps were taken. Less than 2 weeks later, on July 24, 2018, the manager of the assisted living facility where victim C resided told police and social services that victim C was routinely left alone with Neil after school. These agencies once again failed to act, marking yet another missed chance. It's staggering to realize these reports of strange behavior were happening concurrently with victim A. During the lockdowns in April 2020, Neil was known to have victims A and C in the school, unsupervised, and taught them alone without permission. Another key victim in this case was victim E, who was actually the second person to come forward with complaints. When the case exploded, Neil referred to victim E as his little sex toy and made her call him Mr. P, not for PDF file but for perfect. This man, nothing short of a disgusting predator, often took victim E in his car, driving her around rural areas under the pretense of scouting new hiking spots, or at least that was his story later on. In reality, he picked victim E up from school and drove her down isolated country roads where he forced himself on her. The victim later said he would grip her tightly by the neck during these assaults. Around this same time, the same time, Neil attended a conference as a speaker for the Children, Young People, and Education Committee. However, the night before, he had picked up victim E and taken her to the hotel where he was staying, where he assaulted her. Victim B was another innocent, vulnerable girl, groomed using the same manipulative methods. She even had so-called therapy sessions with Neil. Victim B recounted an incident where Neil grabbed her by the neck while forcing his hands up her leg and further up her thigh. Victim F was also mentioned in the review but not part of the criminal case. He manipulated her into becoming emotionally attached to him. According to the review, she felt comforted by Neil. He would prepare meals for her, make her cups of tea, and host her alone in his office. Over and over, Neil made her feel special, telling her she was important to him and that they shared common interests. Victim F said Neil was a good listener who always made time for her, but he also frequently hugged her, crossing professional safeguarding guidelines, legal boundaries, and victim F's personal limits. She never consented to those hugs. This was a known tactic Neil deployed. He would embrace the girls, a calculated first step in establishing physical contact before escalating to more invasive actions. It was a way to test boundaries, to see what he could get away with. Another young woman, victim G, fell into this pattern. At one point during this grooming process, he hugged her with her arms pinned to her sides, leaving her unable to move. This alone would have been deeply unsettling, even claustrophobic. But what made the encounter truly bizarre was that he held the embrace for over 5 minutes. As one can imagine, this left victim G utterly terrified. Incidents like this were reported, but ultimately, the warnings went unheeded. Victim G began avoiding Neil at all. So eventually, Neil demanded she come to his office. She refused, but he simply grabbed her and forcibly. Victim G was just a child, and the full story of what transpired in that room remains a mystery, as it never became part of the official criminal proceedings, perhaps because she was unwilling to speak on it. In May of 2020, another student, victim S, reported that Neil was inappropriately physical with her. She confided in 2 separate teachers, both of whom assured her they would address the issue with Neil. But it appears no meaningful action was ever taken. It felt as if Neil was untouchable, and while we've only mentioned a handful of victims, we now know the list compiled in the review includes at least 19 names. That means a minimum of 19 students endured something no child ever should. It was only a matter of time before his actions finally caught up with him. On the morning of September 6, 2023, as school began, victim A revealed she had been involved in a relationship with Neil Foden. She presented WhatsApp messages and photographs to a member of the school's support staff. The content of the messages was explicitly sexual in nature and pointed to the commission of multiple crimes. Around 10:45 a.m., law enforcement was notified. Victim A, terrified, concealed herself inside a school closet, and it wasn't long before Neil got word of what was unfolding, and he began frantically searching for the girl. He then proceeded to delete 17 images from his phone that he had received from victim A. Without a doubt, these images were graphic. At last, the evidence was undeniable. The North Wilts police placed him under arrest and launched a full criminal investigation.
Mr. Foden, unfortunately I need to arrest you on suspicion of sexual touching of a child and communications with a child.
Right.
You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later align in court. Okay. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Victim A then gave a full statement to the police. Devices were seized from Neil's home and his workplace. Investigators recovered calls, messages, and a trove of digital data. But that was just the beginning. In the wake of his arrest, other students began to come forward. Victim E, Victim B, Victim C, and a wave of others. Investigators painstakingly mapped the sequence of communications, revealing clear patterns of contact and a disturbing escalation of behavior. During his police interviews, Neil answered every question with no comment, but the evidence against him continued to pile up. It took just 2 days for Neil to be formally charged and held in custody. He entered a plea of not guilty, and a trial date was set for April 22, 2024. And both the prosecution and defense teams began to build their cases. Prosecutors opened by arguing that Neil Foden had weaponized his authority to prey on his students. They laid out a clear and chilling pattern. Private messages that would turn sexual, secret meetings arranged off campus, and repeated demands for secrecy. They meticulously cross-referenced timelines with phone data, travel records, and school calendars. One girl had even kept her own detailed records, instinctively knowing that something was terribly wrong. One by one, the vulnerable young women took the stand, their testimonies filling in the remaining gaps. But the defense fought back hard. They urged the jury to question the reliability of teenage memories and to challenge the interpretation of the text messages. They argued the prosecution lacked definitive forensic proof, and claimed that ordinary teacher-student interactions were being twisted into something sinister. On the stand, Neil denied everything. He insisted his conduct had always been professional and that the allegations were complete fabrications. But over the course of 16 days, the mountain of evidence and testimony grew. On May 15, 2024, the jury returned its verdict, finding him guilty on 19 offenses, including 12 counts related to the abuse of a minor. He was also convicted on charges of possessing illicit images of the victims. On July 1, 2024, he was sentenced to 17 years in prison and ordered to serve 2/3 of his term before becoming eligible for parole. During his sentencing remarks, the judge stated that Neil had preyed upon young girls, acted out of an arrogant sense of entitlement, and had demonstrated absolutely no remorse for the devastation he caused. Law enforcement later confirmed that, to TPA, he was banned from teaching for life. Some might say that justice was ultimately served, but many feel that too many people simply looked the other way, and that the incompetence and corruption run far deeper within the education system, child protective services, and local police departments. The case of Neil has to be one of the most enraging in recent memory. There are countless victims today, all because no one was willing to speak out. It's horrifying to think that in this day and age, someone like Neil could climb the professional ladder and get away with these acts for so long. There were 50 separate opportunities to stop him, yet not a single person did.